The story begins in a beautiful temple where the protagonist got there. When she opened her eyes, the circle was white in front of her. After looking at the place a little bit, she realized that it was the temple she had seen on TV. After that, she realized what had happened and thought that she had died again. After a while, the girl noticed that an old man was there. This was her second death, and after it, she found herself in some rather strange place. Looking at her body, the heroine did not understand why she found herself exactly in the body of a child. Further, I thought about it and realized that this death was some kind of different death than the previous ones. While she was thinking about it, she was approached by an old man. He told her if she had finished looking around. He went on to add that the girl was a candidate for regression. In order to go back, one must assume one's true form. Pointing his finger at the little girl, he noticed that she had already lived 2 lives. Because of this, 2 stars were burning on the little girl's body. It could be seen that the stars were burning black in color. Because of this, it turned out that her death was quite under tragic circumstances. The heroine's name is Shushu, and somehow she managed to live 2 lives. She had not lived in another world under that name before. Her real home was Earth. The girl constantly interacted with her subscribers and was a great gamer and streamer. Although she didn't show her face, she was quite popular thanks to her voice. Skills were average, and there was no swearing. Everything was fair. All in all, she was making good money and living well. But one day, after the stream ended, she had a heart attack, and because of it she died. Constantly thinking about that incident, the girl cannot understand how it happened after all. The next time she opened her eyes again, she found herself in a completely different world. She found herself in a country called the Zenta Empire. In her second life, she became the second princess. The heroine's mom died in the war a long time ago, and her father was often sick, but took care of her quite well. Also there, the girl even had a very, very cute and beautiful sister, Lasha. At first, the heroine was even happy to start life anew, but after a while, all this idyll ended and it was not so rosy. The older sister of the protagonist, who was prettier than her and loved her very much, died of illness at the age of 3. Soon after that, a rebellion began. It turned out that even the girl's father, prone to illness, died at this time. The girl's uncle seized the throne at that time. This person was a very bad person. One day, he locked the heroine in a cold room. He also introduced a mentor who constantly beat her. It so happened that if it had not been for the nanny, who constantly looked after the heroine, she would have died quite quickly. Then, when she turned 16, her uncle passed away after an illness. That was also when the protagonist had to become an empress ruled by weaklings. After that, it turned out that the heroine lived and died like a puppet. She repeated the fate of her father, who also died at the hands of rebels. When our eyes opened again, it seemed in this strange place. The girl was in the arms of a man who was carrying, saying that they would come soon. After a while, the heroine found herself in a rather large hall, which was fully illuminated. The bright light blinded the heroine, and she, squinting, tried to see the room. There were people standing around the perimeter of the room, and at the front of the room sat a man on a throne. Also in the center of this room was a cushion that had children sitting on it. They appeared to be excited and didn't understand what was going on. The children looked at each other with a rather frightened look. The heroine was seated near them, and she looked at the children. At the same time, she wondered what 4 children were doing there. They looked to be the same age as the heroine. After a while, the woman who was sitting on the throne said that everyone had gathered. Then, addressing the children, added that they were candidates for regression. The protagonist looked fearfully at the woman, not understanding what was going on. The goddess continued that everything would be fair game. They would receive special gifts from her, starting with the simplest of gifts. The heroine at this point thought her head would duck sideways, because it's pretty heavy. The woman went on to say that the most innocent child would get the best family. The second one after him will get a worse family. And so it turns out that the third child will get the worst family. The scariest thing she said was that the last person won't come back at all. It scared the heroine quite a lot. As a consequence of what she heard, she immediately began to cry. The goddess paid attention to this and asked the little girl why she was crying. All the children immediately paid attention to the main character, who was sobbing very hard. The girl turned to the goddess, saying that she did not want to live in another family because all this is so hard. All this is because she suffered in time of the second life, because she was born in a terrible family. Everyone there were bad people. As a consequence, the heroine there was sentenced to death. Hearing the heroine sobbing and what she was saying, the children started crying too. After a while, the whole room was filled with children's crying. The heroine was screaming that there was no way she was going back to another family, and she didn't want to. The woman, hearing what the little girl was saying, immediately thought about it. Afterward, she thundered that she thought she knew how to solve this easily. Pointing her finger at the girl, she made a speech that if no one wants to be born in a bad family, then let everyone stay here. And this particular girl would only come back alone. The heroine heard this and asked if it was her. After that, she heard that it is exactly like that and she needs to sacrifice herself for her friends. The crying heroine immediately thought about it. She recalled that not too long ago that old man had said that the black star was her past life. Soon the heroine considered the children that were near her. Realized she, the only thing that here he is the only one who has such stars. Based on all this, it can be concluded that all these children died for the first time. Then the heroine also decided that she had already lived a couple of times and will live a couple more. After all, she thought that there was nothing wrong with it. Next, the girl shouted to the goddess that the words about sacrifice bothered her a little, but she agreed. Also about her consent, she repeated several times. In her head, the girl greeted her friends and thought that it had been so long since they had seen each other, and she was already leaving. The woman, after hearing the words, stated that it is wonderful. It turns out that she is willing to make such a sacrifice. Immediately after that, she made some movement, and with her hand and mouthed that she would give her another gift. 3 completely different pouches immediately appeared in front of the heroine. The goddess told the girl to choose 2 of these 3 sacks. The girl immediately began to look closely at the sacks, choosing. But suddenly she smelled something sweet coming from one of the sacks. The smell was from the leftmost bag, which was brown in color. The girl wondered if it was her favorite sugar cookie and so she should pick that one. That said, she hoped that this choice was okay. After a while, she picked up another baggie and declared that she was choosing this one too. With her childish mind, she looked at them and thought the sacks were so pretty. After she said she was choosing these pouches, one of them glowed with a bright light. The goddess looked at it and was herself shocked at the girl's choice. Then a crown appeared from the pouch and found itself on the main character's head. The woman said that this turns out to be the first pouch. With a smile on her face, stated that it would give the heroine a good family. The girl, hearing this phrase, got very excited. The second pouch also began to glow at this time. The goddess said that she would look at this gift a little later. The protagonist began to rise up by some magical force. The goddess continued her phrases that it was time for her to depart. Soaring upwards, and the protagonist continued to smile happily. The goddess noticed that she was smiling even when she was around. At that, thought that the laughter of a child is indeed a treasure. After a while, asked the heroine if she was from another world. The children the heroine had been with recently began to fall asleep. The woman lifted the girl in her arms and smiled at her. While doing so, informed her that she wanted to meet a child who was well reborn. Continued her speech and thought that this child would be her successor. The heroine at this point wondered if they would meet again. Then she could not hear all the phrases of the goddess because she had already fallen asleep. After a while, she found herself in her new life. It was a beautiful estate, which was quite familiar to the heroine. Realizing where the girl was, she burst into tears very hard. The maid asked the princess what had happened to her and why it made her throw up. The heroine continued to cry and thought that everything was wrong. After all, she wasn't throwing up. It was much more complicated at that moment. With a crying face, she wondered why the goddess said she would have a good family. The heroine realized that she had been deceived. This caused her to sob and wondered why she saw her imperial family from the second life when she opened her eyes. At this time, she saw a goddess in front of her who was waving her hand with a smile. Because of this, the girl realized that it was all a hoax. The protagonist continued to cry bitterly because of this. After a while, a sign appeared above her head. It said for the user Shushu to read the terms and conditions. The girl thought that she couldn't live the same life again. She couldn't believe that she would steal back to the place where she was an empress puppet again. That's because there were so many bad people in that place. The heroine didn't understand because of the goddess's words. What was good about this family? Suddenly, a maid approached her and asked the princess what was wrong and what happened to her. After a while, she took out a rattle, and it caught the attention of a little girl. She shook the toy a little and smiled sweetly at the little girl, trying to calm her down. Of all these actions, she still managed to do it, and the heroine stopped crying. A small amount of time passed, and the heroine was already playing by herself while in the palace. During her games, she found a mirror that was in the room. Without thinking long, she immediately crawled over to it. Looking at herself in the mirror, she was a little surprised. While doing so, she wondered what else it was. She was surprised because in her previous life, she didn't have a face like this. She wondered if things had happened a bit the other way around. From all this, I could conclude that she had become her sister. Exactly the one I died as in my past life. Both girls' hair was indeed pink, but her eyes were now a bright green, as if they were leaves. It turns out she didn't realize it at first, but now she was able to figure out that she and her sister had different eye colors. It was that girl was the cutest and sweetest child in the whole world. Now the thought that she had been reborn into her older sister did not come out of the heroine's head. She remembered that the goddess had indeed spoken then about returning. And so it turns out that after a while, the girl really was in the imperial palace. The heroine was now very much wondering if this meant that she would not become a puppet like last time. While the girl was pondering all this, more accurately addressed the maid, calling her Princess Shushu. The heroine realized that she had the same name. In her second life, she was the shy little sister. Also, the heroine remembered the fact that she also had the same character in her first life. Back then, no one knew about the fact that she was streaming. After all, in reality, she was literally the quiet one. After pondering, the heroine began to gaze at something ahead of her. She looked at the princess's nanny, whose name was Nini. The woman was sitting in front of the child and knitting, keeping an eye on the princess. She then asked the girl if she had time to look in the mirror at all. The girl immediately wanted to talk to her about something and began her speech. But to hear from her only could be ridiculous sounds coming out. The heroine thought, what else is it? After all, no matter how hard she tried to move her lips normally, they do not move as she needed. But after a while, the heroine still managed to utter a word, and she called out the name Nini. The woman immediately said the words that the princess wanted. The girl still squeezed out a few words about her sister. The woman wondered in amazement what she was saying about her sister. The girl in her head also thought that she finally understood. Now the nanny wondered what to say to her. She went on to say that the girl had no sister, although she had a Princess Latia. The heroine thought, what is she saying since it is not her sister? Next, the nanny said that that girl had died of the psoriasis disease 2 years ago. The heroine immediately realized that it turns out that she died of psoriasis, and at the same time, and her name was the same. But now the heroine had thoughts in her head as to why she looked just like Latia. The woman immediately realized what she had said and thought that we would probably have kicking extra in front of the princess. The heroine thought that the goddess must have said her soul was from another world. Now the girl wondered if it was all true. So, it means that the body can survive when it has her soul in it. But it turns out that if there is no soul, the body dies forever. Again, it just so happened that this time Latia became the younger sister, and again she ended up dying. Because of all these sad thoughts, tears started to appear in the girl's eyes again. The woman who was looking after the princess immediately noticed this. She immediately ran up to the girl and grabbed her in her arms. At the same time, she told her not to cry. After that, the nanny took the girl in her arms and started to rock her a little. Then she took something in her hand and brought it to the girl, who paid attention to it. The heroine realized that it was probably cotton candy. At the same time, she was happy, because she realized that it is worth it to cry and immediately such a thing is given. Then the girl immediately opened her mouth, tempted by the treat. She liked it quite a lot, and she thought that it was so delicious and so sweet. After a moment, the girl came to her senses and thought that she was sad. Could it be that she still had the child's mind after all? The woman at this point looked at the girl, who quite often changed in her face. And the species of the protagonist was quite cute and charming. She thoughtfully lay down and sucked her own finger. Because of what she saw, the nanny immediately picked up the girl and said that how can you be so cute? She further added to Princess Shushu that she was literally her treasure. While the woman was saying all this, she too had a beautiful and sweet smile on her face. The heroine stared intently at the woman and couldn't look away. After all, it turned out that on the look of the woman was very kind. Now the girl could not still believe it, because in this world, everyone was very evil towards her. Evil were all, but not this woman, at whom the girl was now sitting in her arms. The main character was always amused by her, and the others not at all. After all, it turns out that everyone loved only her sister. Even if in this life the girl will be a little strange, it also seems that people will not hate her. After a while, the girl decided that she needed to be brave. Maybe things have changed, but her sister has always been like this, and it turns out, definitely need to be brave. At the same time, the heroine winked at her nanny, because of such is, and the woman was very much surprised. Next, she immediately turned to the rest of the maids and shouted for them to urgently go to her. The maids Ron, Betty, and Pepe immediately rushed over. With astonishment, they asked what had happened after all. Nini immediately turned the protagonist to them. While doing so, she remarked for those to look closely at the girl. Ron's maid asked what was wrong with the princess. While she was asking, this heroine also winked at her. With this action of hers, she struck her beauty right into her heart. The protagonist immediately thought that she had only winked, and people were immediately delighted. Now it was curious if it was possible to still need to wink. Next, the girl plunged into contemplation, whether she could live like her sister. After all, it was as if that one was always smiling inside herself. The heroine knew that this time she was a cute and sweet child. So cute and sweet that one could go crazy. Because of this, it turns out that even the nanny adores her. After all, now the woman did not take her eyes off the girl, constantly looking after her. She liked it very much, and she was smiling with her childish laughter. Her smile was very sweet at this moment. The maids looked at this one, and they were struck to the heart. Suddenly, the heroine noticed that something was wrong. She immediately wondered what it was. There was something glowing brightly in the corner of the room, and the girl wondered what that light was. There was a message written there from the system that the user Shushu had met the conditions. The heroine noticed this light and said the words, "Nini, what are you for?" looked at the light. While doing so, she wondered if the one didn't notice the light ahead. Nanny noticed, what else is the light if she can't see anything? The little girl immediately wondered if she really couldn't see anything. After thinking that is not it the same color as the light from the second bag, which the goddess gave to the girl. Suddenly, the heroine noticed in the very window of the system that Shushu's interdimensional streamer chat was open. The system further reported that the heroine had one shared channel at the moment. The next message said that the entire staff had logged into one shared chat room. After a moment, the heroine noticed that this was the case. In the number of people in the chat room, reached 3 people were Ron's maids, Betty and Pepe. The girl immediately wondered what it was all about. Then a message appeared in the same chat room from Rona's maid. It said that their princess was so beautiful and the best. The girl wanted her to be her little sister. The protagonist noticed that it was the same chat she had during the streamers in her first life. Next was a message from the nanny saying that their princess was the cutest girl in the world. The nanny continued to hold the girl in her arms. The system wrote that the heroine was getting plus 30 interest points. The protagonist realized that there were 3 people in both the chat room and the room. Next, she thought, that is this really happening like in her past life? The truth was, everything was bad because of the fact that she was not getting any money, I guess. After a while, the heroine turned to the nanny that she wants more cotton candy. The woman remarked to her that you cannot do it now at least, because soon there will be dinner. The girl took the woman by the finger and said, "How can it not answer? She wants more." Then she made a pretty cute look and begged. The nanny was cowed by this look and immediately turned away from the princess. At that, she thought that under no circumstances should she do that. But after a while, she still gave in and reported that she could give just 1 piece. The heroine, because of this, rejoiced and agreed. Suddenly, a new message from the system appeared behind her back. It said that the goddess was impressed with how the heroine was adapting. Her streamer skills would be upgraded, and a concept should be opened in the system. This very menu said that a good streamer should stick to her conceptualization. The heroine is living for the 3rd time and has been blessed by the goddess. Because of this, her abilities as an innocent child have been increased. She needed to make more people fall in love with her. The girl scrutinized all of this text and wondered what the hell this was all about. Then she was horrified and wondered if it gradually meant that she would become more and more childlike in her behavior. The protagonist's musings were interrupted by the stomping of heels that came from behind the door. A maid had burst into the room where everyone was. She immediately informed Miss Ninny that they had an emergency. At the same time, Hu arrived at the manor by carriage. The people of the estate immediately lined up to receive the guest. After a while of looking for this one, a man came out. He immediately raised his eyes upwards and began to look at the manor. The princess's nanny was immediately informed that a guest had arrived. The man that arrived headed inside the building. His hands and clothes were stained, completely covered in blood. The woman was curious. I talked to another maid that if this is the father of the princess, who it could be. And while they were talking, people were already entering this building. In front of them was the main man, and behind him was his entourage. The maids were lined up in a row, receiving their guest. A chair had already been placed for the man, on which he sat down. Looking at the man who had come, the heroine wondered why the man had come here. This man that arrived together was named Berg Willow. The heroine noticed that he had a rather handsome face. He also had a cold stare and flaming red hair. Another distinguishing feature was that he had such broad shoulders. The man sat and stared at the girl who was hiding behind her nanny. He was also wondering in his head why he should be here. The main character was also trying to consider the man who sat in front of her. This man was the greatest warlord of the empire and ruler of the lands of Northern Ashes. The heroine's late mother was Scarlet Willow's half-sister. From this, it appears that he was an uncle to the heroine. Even if he hadn't died catching the poison dragon Kitantu during his second life, it would have been much better. Then too, there probably wouldn't have even been a riot. In Willow's lands ruled by her uncle, there were many strange monsters. Only dukes who inherited dragon blood could rule these lands. He was the duke who had slain one of the strongest dragons, but it so happened that he could not come back alive due to serious injuries when he tried to remove the previous dragons. In his past life, he and the protagonist had barely met. But still, she felt very sorry at the time because of her relative's death. While the heroine was remembering her past life, the man stated that he was fed up. His subordinate immediately tried to address him quietly and say that the princess hears everything. The man afterward added that there was nothing to it, but he wasn't particularly interested. He then began to stare intently at the princess and at the nanny behind whom the girl was standing. Both of them, because of this gaze, were even a little frightened. After all, the man was looking at them, and he had traces of blood on his body at this time. The subordinates further communicated with their superior. He said that didn't His Majesty tell him to take the princess to the temple on his way to suppress? The man of this uttered the phrase, why exactly he should do this. The girl thought, is it really now on the suppression? If it's at a time like this, it must be the subjugation of the fire dragon Kitanta. This time, the Duke tried to overpower the dragon and was seriously injured, agonizing for a long time. He had wounds that led to his death the next time he conquered the dragon. If the heroine remembers everything correctly, this was also the Emperor's plan. One would think that he doesn't know that the Duke is trying to smoke the dragon, but he doesn't. Suddenly, there was a message to the heroine from the system again. It said that the cutoff concept had been activated. At the same time, the girl thought that she had such a strong craving for cotton candy. After a while, she immediately came to her senses. Further thought that one shouldn't do all this and think about it now. The imperial family must receive a blessing at the temple every year. She was sure that the imperial family that descended from the evil beast would not be blessed if even one member of the family did not come to the temple. Otherwise, the entire family will be cursed and miserable. This time, it was the Lord's turn to go to the temple, and he declared that he would not fail. His subordinate remarked to his master that the emperor is now looking for cracks in the northern lands. It turns out that it is not good to spoil relations with the family. After all, the princess is his niece. The man watched carefully, analyzing everything. The heroine thought that if it was an uncle she knows, then such words would not change his mind. Then in the heroine's second life, he was a man who never helped her. The girl even wrote him a letter asking for help, but he just ignored it and was a terrible person. Suddenly, the heroine's nanny turned to the gentleman and said that she wanted to tell him something. The girl immediately took notice of it. While looking at the man, thought about what would happen if she got hurt. I further decided that if it did happen, then she would scratch his eyes out. The man asked the babysitter what she wanted. That was the kind of answer the girl was surprised that he wasn't angry. despite Nini intervening. It turns out that this makes him different from the emperor, who would have killed the man who dared to do so. Nani gave a speech addressing the Lord. She said that he was a guest of their princess, and further stated that if he came, could he dine with their princess? The man asked what kind of dinner, for he could have all the time for it. His subordinate jumped up and said that he hadn't even had dinner yet. Immediately afterward, she went up to the man and whispered in his ear, "I told the Lord that if he came back now, the emperor would send him back here. Might as well just spend some time with them and then leave." The man immediately turned around and thought about the whole situation in words. The protagonist knew that this man did not have a good relationship with the emperor. After thinking about everything stated that you have prepared everything, the protagonist immediately thought that now she would have dinner with her uncle. After thinking about it, their country is divided into 3 main powers. The first one is the imperial family. It turns out that the second is the duke, which symbolizes each season. And the third final one is the wizard's tower. Among all of them, Duke Willow is the ruler of the north, winter, and wild beasts. He was an aristocrat warlord who made an alliance with the imperial family. All kinds of precious ores and from coal mines, magic metals, and many items extracted from animal skins. It was treated as a strong and independent country to trade with, but relations with the imperial family were very bad. The current family had killed the previous emperor and usurped the throne. The main character's mom was the head of the family, and Willow. In general, she could have been a capable warrior, but married the heroine's father. He passed the reins into the hands of his half-brother to his maternal uncle. It so happened that the match died during the war, to which she was sent by her uncle. That is why the Willow family's relations cannot be good. The power over this land was passed down to the emperors from generation to generation. If it wasn't for the support of the son, there could have been a war. Finally, it was time for dinner. The nanny asked the princess to open her mouth, for a bird was flying. The girl ate it happily and said that it was delicious. The nanny was happy to tell her that she was a good girl and asked her to try to eat. The girl immediately agreed to this and took a spoon in her hand. The nanny supported the girl, who tried so hard and said that she would succeed. And the heroine at this time tried to eat herself. Even all the subordinate men were mortified by what was happening. But he himself, in turn, just turned away from it. The main heroine, looking at his face, thought what kind of look he had. In the next instant, the concept attribute system was activated. The protagonist, with a rather so cute face, immediately turned to her uncle. The man's face became much simpler, and he asked what she wanted. The girl, on the other hand, continued to turn to her uncle. Getting off the chair, the heroine thought that this was her only living relative, although in her second life he never visited her and ignored her. The little girl had a candy bar in her hands and was carrying it to the man. Turning to her uncle, the heroine stated that in this post, he watched her eat the deliciousness. Nini almost never gives such candy. Hearing this, the Lord immediately said that she must not have inherited their emperor blood. Emperor's children from generation to generation are born with blonde hair. But neither the protagonist nor her sister Latia were blonde. And the heroine's older sister was quite pretty, and she was loved. But the girl was not. At one time, she thought it would be nice if at least one person could love her. Now, however, she had a nanny who loved her very much. In an instant, the girl turned to her uncle and asked if he loved her. The man hesitated and mouthed that he didn't even know himself. He stated that he didn't really love her, but he wasn't ready to hate her either. The main character realized that he has absolutely no feelings for her, but it's still better than his uncle's relationship in the second life. Again, such a girl made a pretty cute look and turned to her uncle, asked him to hug her. The man asked why on earth should he do it, but the little girl asked in reply if he did not love her. The gentleman kept on saying why on earth should he do it again, but the little girl did not stop and asked again if he did not love her. At this, she made an even lovelier appearance than she had done before. Willow's Berg went into a stupor because of the words he heard. After a while, the man said that the girl was as straightforward and reckless as her sister. He then pointed his finger at his subordinate. The man immediately approached the girl and lifted her into his arms. Because of all this, the system immediately received a notification that a new person was being added to the chat room. The subordinate gentleman's name was Grant. A message appeared in the chat room saying that the girl was so easy and so sweet. She was the sweetest princess that made the man remember his daughter Lude. Then a message appeared on the system that the heroine had received 25 points of interest. Grant was the knight who was now embracing the main heroine. The little girl looked and saw that only her uncle was not in this very chat room. This made the little girl feel sad, and she thought that probably only her uncle was not interested. After that, the heroine realized what she should do and immediately cried very hard, screamed that she needed her uncle several times in a row. Grant tried to calm her down. The girl waved her hands and continued crying and screaming again. The subordinate immediately handed the girl over to his master. The latter in turn asked why he had given her to him, to which he was told that the princess had stopped Bula Akaka, and the man agreed. Next, the girl hugged the man and shouted that she wanted to be with her uncle, but in her heart she apologized to her nanny for saying such words. All this she did, for she realized that if her uncle did not take her to the temple, she must be going there with the knights. In her second life, she had to avoid it because they are bad. So it would be better if she went there without those unpleasant people. Her uncle announces that as he sees the personality, Willow hasn't been revealed. It turns out that there's no reason for a man to lead her from there. The subordinate remarked that yes, there was, and the girl herself thought that also simply cannot. The heroine cannot do this because it will help only once. In the second life, the Duke will be mortally wounded trying to overpower the dragon. It is sad to realize that he died from such a thing. The girl looked at the man and thought that this country was already rotting, and she needed such a man. Immediately, she told everyone that she wanted to leave. After all, the nanny told her that there was a lot of cotton candy outside. The man, upon hearing this, asked in surprise what she had just said. In response, the girl stated that she wanted to see Kitanta, but still, the uncle must go. With these words, the girl gave the man an even greater shock. He, not understanding the whole situation, asked what she had just said. Was it really about Kitantu? The girl continued to eat her candy and just looked at the man sweetly. After that, the man thought to himself that there yet no one else should know about the dragon subjugation. It turns out that even the emperor doesn't know it. And if that's the case, then only one thing has happened. The man immediately thought of the hereditary blood in the girl's body. Immediately, he picked up the child by her waist. As a consequence, he lifted her up, admiring the girl. Now he wondered if it was possible that she had inherited the latent blood of Willow's lineage. He wondered rather intensely if this girl was a hidden prophet. Because of all these actions, the system recorded that Duke Berg had joined the chat room. The girl immediately noticed this and wondered if he had joined the chat as well. Next, she wondered what else a prophet was and what it meant. After all, she had never heard of it in her past life. Perhaps this person is a high-ranking official of the imperial family. Immediately, the man stated that after all, it was probably just impossible. Immediately, the uncle wondered about Ataita's fire dragon. The subordinates asked the man in surprise, something he had just uttered. Uncle retorted by asking who knew out of everyone about Ataita's subordinate. Grant hesitated and replied that no one but them should know it. Next, the man moved the girl again like this. He drew her very close to him and gazed into her eyes. The subordinates, seeing this, asked the master what he was doing. The main character herself was also scared at this point. After all, she did not understand what the man could do to her. Due to the protective reaction of a small child, the protagonist immediately began to cry. Continuing her violent tantrum, the girl screamed Nini's name. The nanny immediately rushed to the gentleman and addressed him. At that very moment, the man asked why the girl was so lightheaded. After all, he remembered that his younger son was heavier by far. Grant told him that the princess was still very young. He added that he himself had hugged his son for the first time when he was 8 years old. While the uncle was moving, the candy on a stick fell out of the girl's hands. She spun on the floor and lay on the ground. The main character continued to cry all the rage, and now said that her candy fell out. Immediately after these words, the man bent down and picked up the candy. He then directed it to the little girl and told her that she did not need to play with her food. The little girl immediately continued to eat the candy by taking it into her mouth. So she wondered if he had given her the candy after all. Also being in the man's arms, she thought she had met her uncle again. After a moment, he asked where the little girl had heard the name Ataita. The heroine remembered that it was all in a past life. Ataita's past conquest of the fire dragon was intertwined with other countries. It turns out that it was all done secretly back then. The girl had also heard about the success of the operation. At that time, the emperor used a rigid scheme. But to the man, the little girl stated that she had heard that her uncle had already caught that dragon. The duke was shocked because of this and asked who she was talking to then. In response to this, the little girl stated that she did not remember anything. Then she thought that she had told everything up to that point. Now he would take her to the temple himself. She recalled that her uncle had been wounded in battle because of the emperor's actions and died soon afterward. The man turned to his subordinate named Hatton. The man, in turn, remarked on what the lord wanted. The man asked how often the princess and the emperor were in contact with each other. The subordinate went on to say, as Mr. Rube said, "It happens about once a month." The man asked if he thought the emperor knew everything about them. The duke immediately stated that it was all true, and he had learned of their plans, and that his subordinates answered him that it was top secret. It turns out the leak was due to someone giving them away. The man wondered what the reason was for the imperial family being told about a traitor. After all, it was strange why the princess had heard about it. He further stated that someone must have specifically talked about it in front of her. The heroine sat silently and listened to everything. He also recalled his past life when the emperor had said all this to her. Now the duke stated that he was very curious about who the traitor was. Because of everything, it turns out that he will not be able to live a long life. The subordinate stated to his master that he would contact the headquarters at the first opportunity. And the duke stood and thought that how the 3-year-old princess remembered the conversation of the emperor, did not miss a single detail. After a while, he turned around with the child in his arms. Next, he informed the Grant that he would take in the princess to the temple and for him to prepare everything. To which the subordinate replied that he would do everything. He also appealed to the girl's nanny to take care of the princess's luggage as well. The woman stated that she would do everything, but the princess is so small. In response to this, the man added that she was traveling with them too. The main character, upon hearing this, said that she didn't want to. At the same time, she thought, what is he doing? After all, it turns out, it is impossible for them to go together with Nini. The man realized that the girl had to be placated so that she would agree. At that very moment, he took out some candies on a stick and slipped them to the girl. The girl, in turn, focused her attention on them. While doing so, she wondered where he got so much candy from. She also thought that if he thought that he could seduce her with candy, it was not so. At the same time, she tried to throw another tantrum, but still the childish mind overcame her, and she grabbed all those candies, excited. A moment later, the Duke announced that Willow would now protect the princess's path to the temple. Afterward, he turned to his subordinates and declared that they were to follow orders. At this, he announced to the nanny that he would be waiting in the carriage, to which she bowed and stated that she would do everything for the Lord. After a while, the system updated, and in the display of the list of people who entered the chat room, there was one member, Berg, that was the Duke. However, nothing was written in the chat, which meant that his thoughts about her were empty. After a couple minutes, there was still a message saying that he thought that the girl was too light and would need to take care of her nutrition. After reading this, the heroine wondered if this man was rather strange. 5 days had passed since that very day. Now the protagonist was on the road in a carriage. That's how it turned out, because everyone armed themselves and went on the road. Literally as much as 5 whole days the heroine could not see her uncle. But despite all this, the girl was not bored or lonely. In fact, moments when the carriage was restored, the subordinates offered the girl different delicious things. But they did not tell her to try it all, because there are different and dried meat which were prepared for her. The little girl with her cute face answered that she only wanted to eat candy. With these answers, she dazzled all the people around her. Those discussed that the princess was only getting more beautiful every day. But that was literally always the case. The heroine wondered if there was any other way to break the indifference of her uncle. After all, it turns out that even his subordinates consider her very beautiful. The system displayed a list of people logged into the chat room, and the participants were 21 people. Knight Tad was dazzled by the beauty, and the message said that the girl was so beautiful that he was about to break a tree. The other knights were also broken by her beauty. The message said that if she flicked her cheek, it would be considered an insult or not. Still, she thought it was strange thoughts going through her head. Dave thought it was the princess of his heart, Then the system displayed 2 clues that the girl had gotten 85 points of interest, and at 45 points of interest too. The heroine began to stare intently at the system window that kept appearing in front of her. The girl realized that it didn't look like it did when she was streaming, so it turns out that there are no sponsors here, but more importantly, she could read their minds through it. Now the protagonist didn't care, because although she hadn't figured it out yet, it felt good to be loved. Suddenly there was a man who shouted to everyone to not immediately disperse. This man was a magician Wei, and in a hood, and headed towards the protagonist. Immediately after approaching her, he addressed the princess. The emperor's manor was quite noisy at this time. There was a bloody man lying on the floor, and the emperor was talking to him. He noticed that the man had left the castle, but now he understood everything. Then the man kicked the man who was lying on the ground with his foot. He called him a useless piece of trash, then stated that the man should not return to this place without the princess. At the same time, an unfamiliar mage ran up to the protagonist. The girl looked at him carefully and wondered who he was and what he wanted from her. The stranger himself used his magic staff to do some spell. In the same instant after using the magic, a piece of cake appeared in front of the heroine. The mage stated that the princess must be satisfied with a tasty meal. Next, he greeted the princess and added to look at this delicious cake. The magician girl began her story that this cake was a strawberry cake and a specialty of the nearby city of Denba. The knights that accompanied the heroine began to ponder that it would take about a day to get to this city. Someone replied that this was definitely the case and that it was some kind of magical crime. Because of this, the girl with magical powers said that magic is fine in small amounts. The heroine went by the name Iwina to the girl and told her to give her a hug. The system registered a new person to join the chat, and it is the magical girl, Iwina. The knight were talking about why they were not given the blessing of mana by their mother. Suddenly, someone stated that it was their princess, and one should treat her sincerely accordingly. A message from the enchantress appeared in the heroine's chat room. It said that these dirty people were touching their beautiful princess with their dirty hands. After that, the system recorded that the girl had received 45 points of interest. The heroine thought that she had heard that this sorceress had mysophobia, and now she was definitely convinced of it. It also seemed that this window of thought system appeared when a person looked at the girl, but now she wondered why she called herself a streamer, since she didn't know how to socialize with people even in a group. Figured that maybe someday she could. The enchantress asked the princess if she tasted good now, to which the little girl stated with a smile on her face that she is tasty and Avena is very good. After these words, the sorceress's arrogance grew higher, and she pondered how it was possible to live among such dirty people. The main character continued to eat the cake, and suddenly the fork fell out of her hands. The moment it was about to fall to the floor, a man grabbed it. The man who saved the heroine's strawberry was the Duke. The little girl immediately burst into tears and was glad that her strawberry was still intact. The man immediately took the girl in his arms. At the same time, he stated that in 5 days they were all tired. He also added that the girl had succeeded in persuading his subjects. Because of this, the girl muttered that she had not done such a thing. The enchantress watched and thought that the lord looked so cute together with the princess. The Duke listened to the girl's stories carefully and looked at her. Next, he simply took the little girl and dropped her off to his arm and leaned her against him. After that, they all continued forward. Behind the man along with the princess were the rest of the subordinates. He sensed this and immediately turned around to watch him. But all the people immediately pretended as if they were doing nothing and just resting. The Duke continued his movement, but the subordinates were also following him. The man sensed this again and turned around and stated what they were doing. Those replied that they were taking a little rest. They all needed a little break after all. Their superior looked at them strangely. At this, he thought that they had never acted like this before and wondered what was going on. Next, he took the princess and sat her down. Immediately afterward, he took the cake from the subordinate and brought it to the girl. After that, addressing the heroine, stated that, unfortunately, she would have to eat in a somewhat dusty place. But the girl responded by saying that it was fine. Literally a few moments passed, and the plate was already empty. The little girl immediately screamed that she had already eaten everything. The man declared that if she had eaten everything, then now he would just sit next to her. But the heroine requested that the man put his arm around her. The man was in no hurry to do so. Geologist girl again asked for that hug. The subordinates at his back began to whisper. How could one be so indifferent in such a situation? It was indeed said that he was so cold-blooded. Suddenly, the Duke heard this and looked at them. Those in turn turned around and ran away. The girl in her head thought that she thought so too. But now for her, all this was not so important. After all, it was pretty good at the moment. The Duke had issued a new carriage and also prepared delicious food for everyone. The wizards also helped everyone to cope with motion sickness. The heroine remembered that in the second life, she was not given food when she went somewhere with the knights. Then only Nanny protected her and told the princess that she would always keep her safe. So it turns out that the Duke is much better than the imperial family. And in the future, the protagonist wants it to always be like that. Suddenly, the little girl looked at her chat room and realized that her uncle was not there right now. She wondered why he went in and out so abruptly. Looking at the man, the heroine wondered if he had lost interest in her. Suddenly, the uncle turned to her and held out a candy on a stick, which she loved. The heroine was very happy with such a gift and noticed that it was a candy. The man with a strange look stated that it was her. He further added that he fed her with sweets. Now the amount of all the food eaten had to be counted. The little girl thought, why did he suddenly pay for the food, and is he such a greedy man? Then she asked the man what else was the sum for the food. At the same time, she thought that the candy was so delicious, and perhaps she should listen to the roses. The Duke asked if she had seen such a book from the Emperor. Suddenly, Grant appeared from behind the man's back and greeted the princess. Afterward, he used magic and said that he was about to show that book. At the same instant, a book with different patterns appeared from a crystal that was glowing. The girl was quite surprised by such a mob and looked at it carefully. Then the protagonist intently began to look at it more closely and remembered what it was. After a while, she decided that it must be a namebook. A namebook is like a biographical dictionary, in which the imperial family wrote down the names of prominent people. It said about the goal, what were the talents, protection of the sun from generation to generation, helping the imperial family, the reason why these talents appear. The Eyes That See Talent is the story of how the first emperor was born under the light of the beast. He received the blessing of Minerva, the goddess of wisdom, and the child's hair turned golden. Because of this, it turned out that donkeys with a high probability of children are born with talent and blondes. But the heroine herself was born without talent and not blonde at all. Now the protagonist thought, if a person has such eyes, then his talent can be immediately recognized. It turns out that her father also had such eyes. The emperor must fill this book because this duty is given by God. The heroine's uncle had this talent, just a little, and she remembers it well. At the same time, the Duke turned to the little girl and asked if she had seen her. The heroine immediately stated that she had seen her. This answer over the man simply shocked. The girl thought that she remembered everything about what was written in this book. After all, countless talented people written in this book were later simply killed. She pondered that she remembered absolutely everything that was written there. But what should she do now? She looked at her uncle next and decided that she needed to think. The man was also looking at the girl carefully, waiting to see what she would say next. The girl thought that he would probably take her to the manor. And after all, if he took her, she would be able to eat a lot of candy. Still, the girl could not make up her mind what to say next. The Duke asked again if she had really seen her, to which the little girl firmly replied that she had definitely seen her. In doing so, she decided that she would make him want to do it. Pointing to the book that had appeared from the crystal, the little girl said that it was darker in color than this book. It also turns out that it was rather large. The man asked if she had read it, and the girl said that she had. Immediately thereafter, the man asked if she had looked at it. While doing so, indicated to his subordinate to do some magical things. Many cakes and different kinds of cakes immediately appeared in front of the girl's eyes. This she was very much pleased with and looked at them. The man muttered that if she told him everything, all these cakes would belong only to her. At the same time in his head, he thought that although he did not have high hopes, but still he needed at least some information. After all, the secret about the conquest of Ataita and leaks out. Next, the Duke drew the girl's attention. He told her that he was going to show her people. As a consequence, she will have to tell if she recognizes someone. The protagonist stared intently and thought that if she tells everything, will he take her? After all, she would like to live among people who love her. She went on to say that she would tell him if she remembered. The man noted that she was good. If she answered him, he would give her a cake, to which the little girl stated that she wanted to eat 100 pieces. The uncle muttered that he didn't think he had that much, but remarked that if the one outweighed the 100, he would give her a coupon. The subordinate immediately wanted to say something. The supervisor immediately looked him over, and the man covered his mouth. Afterward, the man added that how many coupons she would get, so many cakes he would give her. The girl agreed to this, and both business partners shook hands. She and the heroine rejoiced and thought that all these cakes were so much she loved. Grant turned to the princess and got her attention. He asked that the girl look at the first person first. Seeing him on thought, she knew perfectly well since it was one of the subordinates. In past lives, he was the man who tormented and manipulated the girl. The guy wondered if the little girl had seen him, to which the protagonist stated that, of course she had seen. Then once again repeated that she had seen him, and it was true. At the same time, thought what would happen if they did not believe her. In her second life, they had never believed her, even though she had told the truth. Now she was worried about what if he thought she was lying, but it was still the truth. Suddenly the man praised her and said that they could continue. At that, he put his hand on her head, literally in a fatherly way. Immediately after that, he gave the first cake, well deserved. Because of this, the girl immediately broke out into a smile and was pleased. Subordinate Grant was also smiling about it because of the little girl's cute face. After that, they decided to proceed further. The guy was asking the princess what about this person he was further showing. It was literally a short amount of time after they started. The girl was already sitting literally fed up, and there were countless sweets near her. At the same time, she wondered if her uncle thought that she could really be useful. At the same time, the man was staring intently at the little girl and thinking about something. The protagonist thought that it was all rather strange. For this, everything is unusual, that she is not comfortable. The Duke said that if he brings her to the estate, then what should he do with her there? After all, it turns out that there is no particularly important information. The subordinate inquired if the man had not said that he would take her away, but the man remarked that it was just an option. Grant added that he could think so because the prediction was completely wrong, but it turns out that there's nothing left anymore. The man remarked that he didn't know if he should even ask anymore. The subordinate muttered that it would be a good idea to end it there. The baby sat in the nanny's arms. The Duke's subordinate turned to her and asked if she could have one last look at it. There should be nothing wrong with it, and she could answer freely. Afterward, the Duke would give her another cake. The girl replied that it was really just one more cake, since there were already so many. Then she remarked that the uncle was very scary, for he had such an evil look. The man along with his subordinate immediately looked into each other's eyes. Next, the Duke realized that nothing could be done and exhaled deeply. He then asked for forgiveness. After all, this was an important conversation, so that's why he could appear like this. Then he politely asked if she could still say anything else, because it was a request. After these words, the heroine immediately agreed. The guarantor thanked the princess because of that. After a moment, he showed the man and asked if she had met this man. The girl looked at him carefully and realized that this man was very bad. All this because she knew out of all the subordinates, he was the worst, though incredibly talented when it came to conspiracies. This particular man had taken many innocent people's lives. The heroine replied with a frightened voice that she had seen him. Such an answer, the kid was shocked and wondered if she had really seen him. The babe continued to cling to her babysitter and remarked that the man was very bad. After that, it was added that he was doing a good job, but he was a very bad person. He had to be fired quickly. The Duke remarked that he had enough of all this talk, for he did not want to hear it anymore. The man then added that the girl was the child of the older sister, but still, he did not hold out much hope for her. In the next instant, I asked if the girl was personally familiar with the imperial family. Was he more interested? Or was she just throwing around with words without thinking? After inquiring which one did it after all, remembering the very man the girls had shown, anger rolled over him and he shouted out that he was only asking who the traitor was. The shouting frightened the Christmas tree, and with a crying face, she remarked that she knew nothing. After all, he is just a scary and dangerous man. At that, she thought that her uncle was such a bad man too. He also promised that he would not scare her. Next, the girl screamed that she didn't know and repeated several times. Suddenly, the Duke was approached by a subordinate and informed the gentleman that he asked him to forgive his impertinence. But he was the first to ask a question. The boy thought that the man would only try to find out the name, and the first who spoke of a traitor was the princess. Without that, there was no way to know who the traitor was, or if there was one at all. Afterward, he asked the man in charge if it wasn't the same ability. The man looked at the girl who was crying and thought that she must be a prophet. A seer is a rare power that flows in Willow's blood. Because of this power, they can even see into the future. But still, this ability must have a matching pair. That pairing is a knight to protect the prophet. At this very time, the boy continued practicing by stabbing his sword against the doll. All this he had been doing for quite some time, and so he was tired. This boy was on the training ground that prepared the knights. After a while, he got tired and stopped at his to take a break. He then noticed that someone was approaching him. After examining that very person, he inquired if the teacher had gotten well. The Duke at the same time said that prophets of fulfillment could still exist to this day. But it turns out that the last of them was about 200 years ago. Also, the knights protecting the prophet are born extremely strong. Still, if they can't find the prophet, they simply can't handle their limitless power and will go insane. There is also another option where they will simply die then. The man thought about all of this and realized that it was just useless memories. The subordinate turned to the man in charge and inquired because he thought there was a misunderstanding. If the princess really does have prophetic abilities, then the man is stumping her. The Duke immediately afterward intently began to look at the crying girl, who sat with a frightened look. The terrified look made the little girl cry even more. At this, she thought that this was definitely unfair, and decided to have someone tell him so. Uncle stated that it was still unconfirmed. After all, there were some things he rather doubted, and yet he realized that it was all rather strange. Suddenly, the knights protecting the girl approached the Duke. One of them asked him to forgive his rudeness, but the princess was still innocent. Several others stated that they thought so too. As a consequence, it is not possible to think differently. After all, she is still very young. They further added that in 5 days, they were all convinced of it. From such words, the man was shocked and asked if they all went crazy together. But the subordinates noticed that she was also crying so bitterly. At the same time, the girl's system showed a display of the people who had entered the chat room. The participants of this chat room were 22 people. A few of them were Knights Tad, Mia, Dave, Rotten Mage, and 16 other people. Tad's chat said that he was completely sure that the princess was innocent. Dave thought it was the Duke's fault. Rotten's message said, "Sir, will definitely regret it, because everything is irrelevant." After that, the girl received a notification from the system that she had received 115 points of interest, and 55 points too. The protagonist wondered what it was all about. Is she really being supported by everyone? Soon the system gave a new notification. It said that in such a short time, the heroine was able to be liked by the subscribers. It was necessary to get even more love and support. It was also written asking if she could possibly receive a reward from God. The girl read this message carefully and realized what she needed to do next. Immediately, she started crying very loudly and could not stop crying. In her mind, she thought that in her past life, only Nini took her side no matter how sorrowful she was. The knights looked at the crying little girl. It made them very sad too. Suddenly, the sorceress turned to the Duke and inquired that there had been a misunderstanding, judging from the circumstances. With a menacing look, she added that otherwise she would use magic to find the truth. The friend turned to her another Ma and informed Ivana if she used magic, she would lose all her powers. The girl immediately yelled at him and stated that was a problem. After all, if she loses consciousness, the guy will carry her. The Duke was a little shocked at what was happening and just watched the fight of the wizards. The protagonist herself thought that it was really all unfair. Next, she cried even harder, and her crying was heard throughout the neighborhood. After a while, the little girl was already sitting with a pile of sweets in her hands. Her face was completely swollen from crying a lot. A nanny was sitting next to the baby and tried to feed her some cake. Next to them was Iwina, who was unconscious after using magic. In the end, it turned out that it all turned out to be true. The heroine thought that everyone felt sorry for her because of this, and that her uncle was very bad. Now she wondered what kind of a strange person he was. After all, also in her past life, he did not pity her at all. The man stood there, a bit aloof without saying a word after that. But the knights and all this time continued to glare at him as they looked at his back. The man immediately turned around and looked at his subordinates. Several messages appeared in the main character's chat room. Mia thought the poor princess was crying so much, and the Duke was incredibly rude. From several knights, it was also written that the Duke was guilty. Looking at the subordinates, Uncle decided that there was nothing to be done and took a deep breath. After that, he realized what he should do and immediately turned towards the girl. When he was heading towards her, the heroine immediately noticed him. Because of this, she was scared and wondered what was going on. She was quite curious as to what he was going to do. The protagonist was sure that it was all because of the wounds that the Duke received during the enslavement of the dragon. She didn't want the man to die, so she sought to help him. The man turned to the little girl and stated that he had something to say, but immediately she screamed that she was very afraid of the Duke. The uncle stood with an intimidating look, and this made the girl feel scared. Gran immediately turned to the older man. He stated if he continued to look like that, the princess would be even more afraid of him. After all, the man looming over her made it look like a threat. The Duke stated that he didn't even do anything like that. The subordinate added that perhaps he needs to think about his actions towards the princess. Still, he looked even bigger in her eyes. The man wondered if he looked like a threat, since his children were not like that at all. Then he looked at the girl, who was almost crying at that moment. This made him scared again, and he wondered what he should do. After a moment, he took out a small gift box and handed it to the girl. In doing so, he asked for her to take it. The heroine's eyes immediately shone at this, and with a questioning face, she looked at him. The subordinate immediately stated that it was the most delicious fig, and the Duke wanted to give it to the girl. He then added that the Lord had ordered them to bring the most delicious and popular edibles from the city. The protagonist immediately wondered if this was what happened when he used magic. It made the little girl drool, and she thought how delicious it looked. Her uncle inquired if she would eat it, for there was no, after all, poison here. Thereupon, the girl made a show of thinking what to answer. Then she stretched out her little hands and declared that she should be given this. She asked for a cake to be given to her. The man immediately afterward gave her the treat. The little girl opened the box and kept looking at what was inside. She realized that it was a date. She also remembered that in her past life she loved it very much. Immediately she pounced on the treat and thought that she couldn't help herself, because it was very tasty. Herzog, seeing this, wondered if children liked such things. Now he wondered if he could stock a whole wagon with it. The girl was curious too, and wondered if it was a cake and a date. The man mouthed that it was, for it was all as a token of apology to the girl. The little girl immediately rejoiced, and with a thumbs up she asked him to promise her that. Grant, seeing this at once, declared that she was so quite nice to prick up her finger. And the man himself said that it was the most insignificant promise he had ever made in his whole life. Immediately, the joyful girl shouted to her uncle to give her a hug. The man was immediately surprised by this one, and thought how things had changed so quickly. Immediately after that, he even smiled, realizing what had happened. Taking the girl in his arms, he remarked that she was so funny. At that, he added that he had really become an uncle to her again. The protagonist thought that all this is so because he is kind to her. Afterward, she remembered that only she would be able to prevent his death. At the same moment, new notifications appeared in the system to display people logged into the chat room. And there was a new member, Duke Berg. Next, there was a message from this man saying if she was getting fat from desserts. There was also another message in which the Hertz thought it would be a good idea to rent the entire bakery in the next town. The girl read that one, wondered if the whole thing would be a good idea. Also reminded that he was already keeping his promise, she decided that her uncle needed to be put up with. The man's next thoughts were that this girl eats 5 times a day. The little girl's next thought was that she would take another look at the man. And because everyone who feeds her is so kind. It took 15 days to get to the temple. Now they are on their 8th day on the road. Despite all this, the protagonist was not bored. But she didn't even know herself why it was all like this. One of the knights ran up to her and, turning to the princess, declared that he had a rattle. Suddenly running up, the other one asked, "I was such a cheap thing," and further declared to the princess that he had in his hands a thing which he had made himself. But both of them were chased away by the enchantress and shouted to get away from the girl. She further asked why he was giving such dangerous objects to the princess, because she could hurt herself with them. The other magician tried to stop the girl, telling her to stop biting. A knight with a rattle printer's puckered, "Is not this thing for babies or what?" The girl realized that everyone spent a lot of time with her, so she learned their names. Immediately in her head, she reread everyone and called out the names of all the people. She also realized that all of them were the ones who had given her gifts. The main character noticed that one of the knights had a rattle in his hands. After that, she smiled and with a cute face said that she liked the rattle. The guy who brought it to her very much hooted because of this. Next, he handed it to the little girl. The heroine remembered that for 3 lifetimes she didn't even have rattles. It so happened that if there were any, they always went to her older sister. After the gift, the heroine thought that everything was fine and she would give the guy her smile. Next, she immediately winked at him. The guy was blown away by this action and he thought, "Is she really an angel?" He then ran up to the tree and started hitting it. In his head, he thought that he will definitely get married and he needs a child who will be like a cute rabbit. The heroine, looking at this, thought why he beat the tree. Next, the girl saw that the other knights also ran up. The girl knight said that she had a boomerang. Another claimed to have a knife for self-defense, but it was pointed out to him that it should be put away since it was still a baby. They all wanted the little girl to wink at them too. The enchantress immediately declared that they had enough of their chatter and, turning to the princess, added that she had magic. At that moment, a hollowed out from the system about displaying the people logged into the chat room appeared in front of the heroine. The participants of this chat room were 15 people, among them knights and mages. Knight Tad thought that even if the princess became a mosquito, he would not spare blood for her. The little girl thought that she didn't even want to imagine all this. Dave thought that he very much did not want to go to the post, for there would be no princess there. Rotten's thoughts were that if his first relationship hadn't ended with the separation, he might have grandchildren like the princess. Mia thought that if only the princess could come to their house, her little brother would be glad. Also in the chat room were messages from Ewan, who thought she had fought the male wizard today. She stated to him that she wanted to send her heart to the princess. But unfortunately, they didn't have a box that big, and how only that could be. After that, there were thoughts that the girl had heard about the princess, that she was very kind, but that wasn't quite true. After all, she had taken up residence in her heart. Immediately after all these messages, 2 notifications appeared in the system about receiving 115 points of interest, and in the next one, 15 points. As she continued to look at all these messages, the heroine realized that Uwena was the most active. Because of all this activity, she was even a little scared. It was a rather sunny day, and the weather outside was beautiful. Near the protagonist was a pile of gifts that people had given her. At this moment, the knights announced that it was time for them to train. As they left, they said goodbye to the little girl, but they had to hurry up and go. The protagonist knew that they all disappeared once a day. This is all done to practice or to get ready for a meeting. Since the squad is going to smoke the dragon Ataitu, they don't neglect training. It turns out that this was the only time the heroine could be alone with her nanny Nini. Next, the girl began to consider the chat room, in which there were strange messages. Having carefully considered them, she thought that in general it is more like comments. After all, they are the ones who express their thoughts, not the chat window this one looks like. Next, the girl remembered one of the popular social networks. There too, people under different videos left their comments. The little girl was quite wondering if he could communicate with them there. If all this is so, then when it is possible? Then the heroine thought that she would also like to give them something in return. After that, a new notification from the system appeared, saying that the interest level had increased from level 1 to level 2. It also said that streamer Shushu's streamer rank had increased from simpleton rank to baron rank. The system was congratulating the protagonist for increasing her rank, and she was to receive a reward for it. The little girl read the message and wondered what else a rank upgrade was. Some 2 stars appeared in the heroine's hands, and she wondered if they had been here before. When she had streamed before, there were only silver and gold buttons for ranks, but this particular place some special rank baron. Now the protagonist was wondering if this was done for the fictional world. She realized that she just didn't know what it was, and further continued to figure it out. As she did so, she would raise her head up and tap something with her finger. The nanny noticed this and told the princess that it was all quite dangerous. Suddenly, the girl thought that she didn't have enough sugar and needed to eat some candy. Immediately, she turned to the nanny and stated that she wanted candy. The nanny stated that before the meal she could give only one, but the heroine also agreed to this at once. At the same time, in the bushes near the main character of the nanny was the silhouette of some monster. The woman took out a candy and at the same time wanted to give it to the child, but suddenly something rustled in the bushes and the leaf flew near the baby. Because of this, she did not eat the candy, but looked at the leaves on the bushes. Immediately, a notification about the level up reward appeared in the system. But suddenly, the knights noticed that there was some kind of explosion in the bushes. There was also a very strong roar, and all the birds from there immediately flew away. The knights realized that some danger was coming and got ready. Because of the strong roar, the little girl along with her nanny couldn't even move. It also turned out that from all these actions, the heroine could not eat her candy, and she fell to the floor. After a few moments, the girl stunk that all these sounds were the sounds of a monster. Immediately, everyone looked up and noticed that a huge monster in the shape of a wolf had appeared in front of them. The knights immediately began to gather and shouted for everyone to get ready, for it was an infected werewolf. Some shouted that they should immediately prepare arrows and attack. As they were trying to do so, they suddenly noticed the silhouette of the Duke flying between them. He, in turn, was already flying in a furious attack with his sword, trying to cut down the monster. It ended up doing so, and the man easily slew the monster that was in front of them. Immediately afterward, he walked up to the monster and grabbed it with his hand, then thrust his hand into the chest of the werewolf, grabbing its organs. While all the knights were fighting, Nanny and the little girl hid in a carriage that was not far away. The nanny hugged the little girl tightly, trying to calm him down. After all, the little girl was frightened. A terrible monster that appeared in front of him. Next, the woman turned to the girl and said that knights and wizards fight the monster, but she should not be afraid. But the heroine herself was on the verge of crying at this moment. Nini hugged the little girl and stated that they were safe, and she would be sure to thank the knights later.